I am a successful software engineer now. But 8 years ago, my identical twin Thomas betrayed me in the worst way by sleeping with my girlfriend Jessica. What hurt more was my entire family taking his side, disowning me when I refused to forgive them. Last week, they suddenly reached out wanting to reconnect after Thomas and Jessica divorced. Trước khi tôi kể tiếp câu chuyện đau lòng này, hãy cho tôi biết bạn đang xem từ đâu và nhấn subscribe nếu bạn muốn nghe thêm những câu chuyện về sự phản bội và cách tôi vượt qua nó. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Duluth, Minnesota, where the winters were harsh and family bonds were supposed to be unbreakable. Our house was modest but comfortable with 4 bedrooms and a large backyard where Thomas and I would play catch with our father on summer evenings. From early childhood, the difference in how our parents treated us was subtle but unmistakable. Thomas was the golden child from the moment we started school. He excelled at sports, particularly football and baseball, bringing home trophies that our parents proudly displayed in the living room cabinet. With his outgoing personality and natural charisma, he easily became the most popular kid in our grade. Thomas had an uncanny ability to make people laugh and feel special, a trait our parents constantly praised him for. I, on the other hand, was the quieter twin. While Thomas dominated the football field, I found my place in the computer lab and library. Math and science came naturally to me, and I spent hours reading science fiction novels and tinkering with our family computer. My report cards were filled with but somehow my academic achievements never received the same enthusiastic response as Thomas making the varsity team or being voted class president. At dinner, conversations revolved around Thomas' upcoming games or the parties he was invited to. When I tried to share my excitement about winning the regional science fair, Dad would nod distractedly before turning to ask Thomas about football practice. Mom would occasionally pat my hand and say, "You are so smart, Ricky," but she would beam with pride when introducing Thomas to her friends. Despite the favoritism, Thomas and I maintained a decent relationship throughout our early years. He was protective of me when other kids tried to bully me for being a nerd. I remember one particular incident in 6th grade when a group of older boys cornered me after school, demanding I give them my new calculator. Thomas appeared out of nowhere, stood between us, and made it clear that messing with me meant dealing with him. The boys backed off immediately. That night I thanked him, and he shrugged casually, saying, "No one gets to pick on you but me." It was his way of showing he cared, and those moments made me believe that blood truly was thicker than water. I convinced myself that no matter how differently our parents treated us, Thomas and I would always have each other's backs. As we grew older, I stopped trying to compete with Thomas for our parents' attention. Instead, I focused on carving my own path. While he was busy being the social butterfly and star athlete, I joined the robotics club and computer programming team. I found friends who appreciated my intelligence and shared my interests. I promised myself I would succeed on my own terms, even if my achievements went unnoticed at home. The first significant crack in my relationship with Thomas appeared during our junior year of high school. I had spent months working on an advanced computer program for the state science competition. It was innovative enough that my teacher suggested I could potentially get college scholarships based on it. The night before the submission deadline, I found Thomas in my room, copying my work onto a flash drive. When I confronted him, he gave me that charming smile that worked on everyone else and said he just needed some ideas for his own project. I later discovered he had submitted my program as his own for a different competition with a cash prize. When I told our parents, they dismissed my concerns, suggesting I was being paranoid and competitive. Mom even suggested I should be flattered that Thomas was inspired by my work. That was my first real taste of betrayal, a preview of the pattern that would ultimately destroy our relationship. I should have recognized it as the warning sign it was, but I convinced myself it was a one-time mistake. I wanted to believe in the brother who had once protected me from bullies, not the person who would steal my work for his own gain. I met Jessica Walker during my sophomore year at the University of Minnesota. We shared an elective art history class, though we were pursuing different majors. I was studying computer science while Jessica was majoring in graphic design. She sat 2 rows in front of me, and I noticed her immediately with her vibrant red hair that cascaded down her back in loose curls. She always had colorful sketches spread across her desk before class started. Our first conversation happened when the professor assigned a group project on Renaissance art. Jessica approached me with a confident smile, introduced herself, and asked if I wanted to partner with her. I was surprised she would choose the quiet guy who always sat in the back, but I eagerly agreed. We exchanged numbers and arranged to meet at the campus coffee shop the next day. Working with Jessica was unlike any experience I had ever had. She was creative and passionate, but also organized and focused. She had a way of seeing the world that was completely different from my logical, systematic approach. Where I saw patterns and systems, she saw beauty and potential. Our contrasting perspectives made the project better than either of us could have created alone. After submitting our project, which earned us an A+, Jessica suggested we celebrate with dinner. That dinner led to a movie the following weekend, which led to more study sessions and coffee dates. 3 months later, we were officially a couple, and I had never been happier. Over the next 2 years, our relationship deepened in ways I had never thought possible. Jessica was the first person who seemed to truly see me for who I was, not as Thomas' quieter, less impressive twin, but as Ricky, a person with his own strengths and dreams. She listened when I talked about my software projects and encouraged me to pursue internships at major tech companies. In return, I supported her artistic aspirations, helping her set up an online portfolio and attending every art show where her work was displayed. We made plans for our future together. After graduation, we would move to Seattle, where I had been offered a promising position at a growing software company, and Jessica could pursue her career in graphic design. We spent hours talking about the apartment we would share, the weekend trips we would take to explore the Pacific Northwest, and even the possibility of adopting a dog together. For once in my life, I felt like I was the main character in my own story, not just Thomas' shadow. During Thanksgiving break of our senior year, I invited Jessica to come home with me to meet my family. I was both excited and nervous. I wanted my parents to see that I had found someone special, someone who valued me, but I was also worried about how Thomas would react. He had always had everything I wanted, and part of me feared he would somehow charm Jessica away from me too. The initial meeting went better than I expected. My parents welcomed Jessica warmly, asking about her studies and career goals. Mom even commented on how Jessica's artistic talent complemented my technical skills. For once, I felt like they were genuinely happy for me, not comparing me to Thomas or finding me lacking. Thomas, who was home from a different university for the holiday, was surprisingly friendly toward Jessica. He asked thoughtful questions about her artwork and shared funny stories from our childhood that showed me in a positive light. Jessica seemed to enjoy his company, laughing at his jokes and engaging enthusiastically in conversations with him. I remember feeling relieved and thinking that perhaps we had all matured past the dynamics of our younger years. After returning to campus, Jessica and I fell back into our usual routine of classes, study sessions, and planning our future. But around February, I began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. She started receiving text messages that would make her smile in a way I had not seen before, and when I asked who they were from, she would casually mention a classmate or brush it off as nothing important. Our date nights became less frequent, with Jessica citing group projects or portfolio preparations as reasons to cancel plans. When we did spend time together, she seemed distracted, checking her phone more often and being less engaged in our conversations. I tried to convince myself that it was just the stress of our final semester and the pressure of upcoming graduation. Then came the phone call from my friend Kevin, who attended the same university as Thomas. He hesitated before telling me that he had seen Thomas and a red-haired girl who looked like Jessica at a restaurant near Thomas' campus, holding hands across the table and kissing. I immediately defended Jessica, telling Kevin he must have seen someone else, that Jessica was busy with a project on campus and would never betray me like that. The seed of doubt had been planted, though. I started paying more attention to the times when Jessica said she was too busy to meet, checking her social media for any clues. I hated myself for becoming suspicious, for turning into the jealous boyfriend I never wanted to be. I trusted Jessica, I told myself repeatedly. She would never hurt me like that, especially not with my own twin brother. My world came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I had been away at a 3-day tech conference in Chicago, but managed to catch an earlier flight home, wanting to surprise Jessica. I still had a key to her apartment, so I let myself in, quietly planning to prepare dinner for her before she returned from her afternoon class. The sound of laughter coming from her bedroom stopped me in my tracks. I recognized both voices, immediately having grown up, hearing one of them my entire life. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly pushed open the bedroom door, desperately hoping my mind was playing tricks on me. But there they were, Thomas and Jessica, tangled in her sheets, in her bed, in the space that had been sacred to our relationship. They froze when they saw me, Jessica, clutching the sheet to her chest, her eyes wide with shock and shame. Thomas, on the other hand, showed no such remorse. He met my gaze with a challenging look, as if daring me to react. The room spun around me as rage, betrayal, and heartbreak crashed through my body in violent waves. I do not remember everything I said in that moment, only fragments of accusations and questions that had no satisfying answers. Jessica cried, repeating "I'm sorry" over and over again, as if those words could somehow undo the damage. Thomas eventually stood up, unashamed of his nakedness, and had the audacity to say, "She was never really happy with you, Rick. We did not mean for this to happen, but you have to admit, she and I make more sense together." When I lunged at him, Jessica screamed and jumped between us. I stopped myself before touching either of them, unwilling to sink to physical violence, despite the overwhelming urge to punch the smug expression off my brother's face. Instead, I backed away and told Jessica she had 48 hours to remove her things from my apartment where she had practically been living. To Thomas, I said nothing. There were no words that could adequately express the depth of his betrayal. As I turned to leave, Thomas called after me, "Don't be so dramatic. It is just a girl. We are brothers that should count for more than some college relationship." Those words would echo in my mind for years to come, a perfect encapsulation of how little my feelings had ever mattered to him. I spent that night in a cheap motel, unable to face returning to my apartment where Jessica might come to collect her things. My emotions cycled between numbness, rage, and devastating sadness. Around midnight, I finally called my parents, hoping for some comfort, or at least understanding from the people who had raised me. Mom answered her voice, immediately concerned when she heard the strain in mine. I explained what had happened, trying to keep my tone even despite the pain tearing through me. Her immediate response was disbelief, not in Thomas' actions, but in my account of the situation. She suggested that perhaps I had misunderstood what I saw, or that I was exaggerating due to my always present jealousy toward my brother. Dad got on the phone and proposed that we have a family meeting to discuss the situation rationally. He said they would drive up that weekend, and we could all sit down together like adults. I agreed desperately, hoping that face to face they would see the truth, and finally take my side. That Saturday, my parents arrived at my apartment, where Thomas was already waiting, having driven from his campus. Jessica had cleared out her belongings while I stayed with a friend, leaving only a handwritten note that said, "I never meant to hurt you." Thomas and I connected in a way I cannot explain. I am sorry. The family meeting began civilly enough, with Dad asking both Thomas and me to explain what had happened from our perspectives. I recounted finding them together, the weeks of suspicious behavior leading up to it, and the callous way Thomas had responded when caught. When it was Thomas' turn, he spun a completely different narrative. According to him, Jessica had been unhappy for months, but was afraid to break up with me because she knew how emotionally dependent I was on her. He claimed she had confided in him during Thanksgiving, seeking advice on how to end things with me gently. One thing had led to another, and they had developed feelings for each other, but had been planning to tell me properly after graduation to avoid disrupting my final semester. My mother nodded sympathetically throughout Thomas' version of events, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like pity. When Jessica arrived, invited by Thomas without my knowledge, she largely backed up his story, though she at least had the decency to look ashamed. Jessica explained that while she cared for me deeply as a friend, the passion had faded from our relationship months ago. She claimed Thomas understood her artistic side in a way I never could, despite my supportive efforts. When she described Thomas as more emotionally available, I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity. The brother who had spent our entire lives taking what was mine was now being portrayed as the sensitive, understanding one. As the conversation continued, it became clear that my parents had already decided who to believe before even hearing my side. Mom suggested that I had always struggled with sharing from toys as a child to attention as an adult. Dad proposed that perhaps this situation was a blessing in disguise, as it was better to discover Jessica's true feelings now rather than after we had moved across the country together. The final blow came when my father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Son, sometimes we have to accept that people choose others over us." Thomas and Jessica made a mistake in how they handled this, but the heart wants what it wants. The mature thing would be to forgive them both and move forward as a family. I stared at him in disbelief, then at my mother, who was nodding in agreement, and finally at Thomas, who had the audacity to reach over and place a comforting hand on my shoulder. I shrugged it off violently and stood up, no longer able to contain my anger. "You want me to forgive them?" I shouted. "My own brother sneaks around with my girlfriend of 2 years, lies to my face, and I am supposed to just accept that because he is family. When has being family ever mattered? When it comes to choosing between us," I turned to my parents' years of repressed feelings finally boiling over. "You have always chosen him. Every game, every award, every single day of our lives, you made it clear who the favorite son was. And now, even when he has objectively wronged me, you are still taking his side." Mom began to cry, always her defense mechanism when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Dad stood up, his expression hardening. "That is enough, Richard. This attitude is exactly why relationships have been difficult for you. Your brother made a mistake, but your reaction is completely disproportionate. Until you can speak to your family with respect and work toward forgiveness, perhaps it is better if we take some space." I looked around at the three of them, suddenly aware that I was completely alone in that room, despite being surrounded by my blood relatives. In that moment, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. "If this is what family means to you," I said quietly, "then I do not want to be part of this family anymore." I walked out of my own apartment, leaving them behind. That was the last time I spoke directly to any of them for 8 years. The following weeks were a blur of pain and practical considerations. I completed my final semester remotely, arranging with professors to take exams and submit projects without attending classes where I might run into Jessica. I broke the lease on my apartment, unable to continue living in a space so tainted by betrayal. I couch surfed with acquaintances until graduation, which I skipped to avoid seeing my family or Jessica. True to the plan I had made with Jessica, I moved to Seattle after graduation, though I went alone. The company honored their job offer, and I threw myself into work, finding solace in the logical, predictable world of code. My first apartment was a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood, all I could afford without the roommate I had planned to have. I lived on ramen and coffee, working 12-hour days to avoid having to sit alone with my thoughts in my empty apartment. The first 6 months in Seattle were the loneliest of my life. I had no friends, no support system, and a family that had chosen my brother over me. I developed insomnia, often coding through the night, because sleep brought nightmares of Jessica and Thomas together. I lost weight, forgot to eat, and rarely left my apartment except for work. On particularly bad nights, I would find myself staring at my phone, thumb hovering over my mother's number, pride and pain, battling with the desperate need to hear a familiar voice. But I never made that call. Instead, I found a therapist through my company health insurance, a gentle but straightforward woman named Dr. Lena Reynolds, who helped me process my grief and anger. She introduced me to mindfulness techniques and encouraged me to join groups where I might meet new people. Most importantly, she validated my decision to cut ties with my family, assuring me that protecting myself from people who hurt me was not selfish but necessary for healing. Gradually, things began to improve. At work, I bonded with a colleague named Sam, a fellow transplant from the Midwest, who invited me to join his weekend hiking group. Through those excursions into the beautiful Washington wilderness, I began to build a new social circle. The physical exertion of climbing mountains helped channel my anger, while the majesty of nature put my problems into perspective. I discovered a passion for long-distance running, eventually training for and completing the Seattle Marathon. Each mile I ran felt like putting more distance between myself and the pain of my past. I joined a book club, a cooking class, and a volunteer group that built websites for nonprofits. Slowly, I constructed a life filled with meaningful activities and genuine connections. 3 years after moving to Seattle, I received a promotion to senior software engineer. By then, I had moved to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment with a view of the city skyline, adopted a rescue dog named Max, and established a routine that brought me contentment, if not complete happiness. I still thought about my family and Jessica occasionally, but the sharp pain had dulled to a distant ache. Through social media, which I rarely checked, I learned that Thomas and Jessica had gotten married in an elaborate ceremony that my parents proudly shared photos of. I was not invited. Of course. I saw pictures of holiday gatherings, my parents' retirement party, and the purchase of their dream vacation home in Florida. Life had continued for them without me, just as mine had continued without them. In my 5th year in Seattle, I met Alicia at a tech conference where we were both presenters. She was brilliant, kind, and understood boundaries in a way that made me feel safe opening up to her about my past. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and honest communication. When I finally told her the full story of my family and Jessica, she held me as I cried for what felt like the first time since it all happened. With Alicia by my side, I found myself growing stronger and more secure. We moved in together after a year of dating, blending our lives, and creating a home that felt truly safe. She encouraged me to pursue my dream of starting my own software consulting business, offering both emotional support and practical advice from her experience as a project manager. With her encouragement, I launched my company, which grew steadily over the next 2 years. Through it all, my family remained distant figures in my past. My parents sent perfunctory birthday cards with no personal messages, which I never responded to. Thomas made no attempts to contact me at all. I had created a new life that did not include them, and most days I was at peace with that decision. Last Wednesday, an email notification appeared on my phone while Alicia and I were having breakfast. The sender name made my coffee taste suddenly bitter. Mom Winters. I stared at the screen, debating whether to open it or delete it, unread. Alicia noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. When I told her, she squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever you decide, I am here." I opened the email. It was longer than I expected, beginning with awkward pleasantries about hoping I was well and mentioning how successful I appeared to be based on my LinkedIn profile. Then came the real purpose of the message. Thomas and Jessica had divorced 6 months ago after she had an affair with his best friend. Mom described how devastated Thomas had been, how he had finally understood what it felt like to be betrayed by the people closest to him. The irony was almost too perfect. The golden child had experienced the same pain he had inflicted on me, delivered by the same woman. My mother went on to say that this experience had led to many family discussions about how they had handled the situation with me 8 years ago. They had realized belatedly that they had been wrong to dismiss my feelings and take Thomas' side so unequivocally. The email concluded with an invitation. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary in 1 month, and they wanted me to attend. The whole family would be there, including Thomas, who apparently wanted to apologize in person. Mom wrote that they all missed me terribly and wanted to make amends to be a complete family again. I read the email 3 times before setting my phone down. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to continue the life I had built without their complications. Another part, a smaller but persistent voice, wondered if this might be an opportunity for the closure I had never really achieved. I discussed it with Alicia that evening, sharing the conflicted feelings the email had triggered. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions without pushing me in either direction. "You know I will support whatever you decide," she said finally. "But I want you to think about what you actually want from this. Are you looking for them to fully acknowledge how they hurt you? Do you want to rebuild a relationship with them? Or are you just curious to see them again after all this time? Understanding your own expectations might help you avoid being hurt again." I also reached out to Sam, who had been there during my darkest days, and knew the full extent of what I had gone through. "They only want to reconcile now because Thomas got a taste of his own medicine," Sam pointed out bluntly. "Where was this realization for the past 8 years? While you were building a life without them. I am not saying don't go, But go in with your eyes open, man. After a week of consideration, I decided to meet with my family, but on my own terms. I responded to my mother's email, declining the anniversary party, but suggesting a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop midway between Seattle and their home. I specified that I would come alone, and I expected to speak with them for no more than an hour. I made it clear that this meeting was not a commitment to resume regular family relations, but simply a conversation. The day of the meeting arrived with a Seattle drizzle that matched my mood. Alicia drove me to the coffee shop, waiting in the car to give me space while remaining close enough for support if I needed it. I spotted my parents and Thomas already seated at a corner table when I walked in, all three of them looking up anxiously as the door chimed. My mother stood immediately, moving as if to embrace me, but stopped when she saw my expression. I had not prepared myself for how they would look after 8 years. Dad hair had gone completely gray, and Mom had aged more than time alone could explain. Thomas, however, still had the same charismatic presence, though his eyes held a weariness I had never seen in him before. I sat down, declining offers of coffee or pastries. For a moment, nobody spoke, the weight of 8 years of silence hanging heavy between us. Finally, Mom reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "Ricky," she began, her voice wavering, "we cannot begin to tell you how sorry we are. What we did, how we treated you, it was unforgivable." Dad nodded solemnly. "We failed you as parents. We should have supported you, believed you, stood by you. Instead, we took the easy route of siding with Thomas, like we always had. It took us far too long to recognize that pattern and the damage it caused." Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Rick, I was selfish and cruel. I took Jessica because I could, because I was used to taking what you had. It was not even about her, not really. It was about competing with you, about proving I could have anything I wanted. When she did the same thing to me, I finally understood what I had done to you." I listened to their apologies without interruption, noting how practiced they sounded, how they hit all the right notes of remorse and regret. When they finished, they looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to absolve them, to say that all was forgiven and we could go back to being a family again. Instead, I asked why now. It's been 8 years. 8 years where I built a new life, found happiness, created success. Why do you suddenly want me back in your lives? They exchanged uncomfortable glances before Mom admitted, "Seeing Thomas go through such pain made us reflect on how we treated you." And she hesitated. "Your father and I are getting older. We don't want to leave this world with this rift still between us." Thomas added, "My therapist helped me see how toxic our family dynamics were, how Mom and Dad pitted us against each other by always favoring me. I want to try to have a real brotherhood with you, Rick. No competition, no jealousy, just support." I nodded slowly, taking in their words. Then I told them about my life in Seattle, about my successful business, about Alicia, and our plans to get married next spring. I described the family I had created for myself, the chosen relationships that had sustained me when they had not. I spoke without anger or accusation, simply stating facts. "I appreciate your apologies," I said finally, "and I am glad that you have come to these realizations. But I need you to understand something. I am not the same person who walked out of that apartment 8 years ago. That Ricky might have desperately wanted this reconciliation, might have jumped at the chance to be accepted by his family again. But I don't need that acceptance anymore." My mother began to cry quietly, and my father put his arm around her shoulders. Thomas stared down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't hate any of you." I continued, surprising myself with the truth of that statement. "But I don't trust you either. Trust is earned, and rebuilding it takes time. I am not opposed to having some form of contact going forward, emails or occasional phone calls perhaps, but I will not pretend that nothing happened or that your apologies automatically fix everything." I set clear boundaries. I would not be attending family holidays or large gatherings yet. I would not be sharing details about my business or personal life beyond what I chose to reveal. And I would expect them to respect my relationship with Alicia, who had been there for me when they were not. Before leaving, I looked directly at Thomas and said, "I hope Jessica's betrayal taught you something valuable. I hope you really have changed. But I also hope you understand that some bridges once burned can never be fully rebuilt. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years, not because I had forgiven them completely, but because I had faced them on my own terms, as the person I had become, rather than the person they had left behind. Alicia was waiting in the car, rain droplets glistening on her dark hair. When I slid into the passenger seat, she took my hand without speaking, a silent question in her eyes. "I am okay," I told her, and meant it. "They want me back in their lives, but I set boundaries. We will see if they can respect them." As we drove back to our home in Seattle, I realized that the most important lesson I had learned through all of this was that family is not just about blood. It is about who stands by you when it matters, who respects your feelings and supports your growth. By that definition, Alicia, Sam, and the friends who had become my chosen family were more real to me than the people I had left behind in that coffee shop. I still maintain limited contact with my parents through occasional emails. Thomas sends birthday cards that I sometimes respond to. They respect the boundaries I have established, perhaps understanding that this limited connection is more than they deserve, but all I am willing to give. Sometimes the best way to forgive is not to forget, but to learn to live without letting the past define your future. I do not know if my family and I will ever fully heal what was broken, but I do know that I have found peace within myself, and ultimately that matters more than any reconciliation. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? Do you think blood relationships deserve more chances than other relationships, or should the same standards apply to all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more about overcoming betrayal and building a life on your own terms. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to protect your peace, even from family. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it.